Herald and News, your news now.
The Herald and News.
Empowering the community.
Basin Views.
Herald and News, your news now. Klamath Falls, Oregon.
The Herald and News.
Podcast. Empowering the community and serving the Klamath Basin. This is the Herald and News Basin Views podcast. Greetings and welcome to Basin Views, a Herald and News podcast featuring interviews with local experts discussing issues important to the Klamath Basin. I'm Kurt Liedtke with the Herald and News. This week we are joined by Mark Bransom, CEO of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, or KRRC, here to talk about the dam removal process and the many issues and benefits of that plan. Mark, thank you for taking some time out to speak with us today.
Thank you, Kurt. Glad to be with you.
Well, I always like to start these things off with a bit of background on the individual before we delve into the hot topic. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the position of being CEO of KRRC?
Yeah, sure. So I have a background working in water resources and environmental management that spans a couple of decades. I came from Oregon State University and went to work for CH2M Hill in Portland and worked with the consulting world for a number of years. I have long followed issues in the Klamath, having worked at the mouth of the Klamath River back in the 80s and developed a keen personal and professional interest in the basin and specifically the dam removal work, and find myself now as the CEO of the KRRC working on the implementation of the KHSA, the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement.
So what is KRRC?
Well, the KRRC is a nonprofit corporation that was born out of the amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, which is the governing agreement for the dam removal process. The signatories to the agreement decided that they needed to form a dam removal entity and considered a nonprofit as the appropriate entity to fulfill the role of the DRE. So the KRRC is the nonprofit that ultimately will take possession of the 4 dams pending all the regulatory approvals, and then upon further regulatory approvals will be the entity responsible for removing the dams and restoring all of the lands.
I always find it's important to know how exactly we got here. How did we get to this point? And looking at history is a great way to understand that. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Klamath Project and how all of these dams that were built in our rivers and tributaries came about?
Sure. I think it all starts with the acknowledgement that the Klamath River is a working river and that it is over-allocated in many ways. We've seen no shortage of tension in the basin over the years as a result of drought conditions and declining salmon runs and water quality issues and a variety of other things that challenge the river and the communities that depend on it. So dam removal has been contemplated for well over a decade, and as recently as 2010, parties with an interest in addressing comprehensive natural resources management challenges in the basin came together and said, how can we do something to address the over-allocation of resources and provide some certainty around water and other important resources in the basin? And out of that process came the KHSA and a companion agreement at the time known as the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement. Those required congressional action, and they did not pass through Congress in 2015, but the parties to the KHSA made a commitment to come back together and redo that agreement, resulting in the amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement signed in 2016 to move forward with dam removal. So the KRRC is the entity responsible for implementation of the KHSA, and we're really optimistic that the parties to the broader sets of agreements that were contemplated earlier have come back together for the purposes of talking about how they might be able to recreate a more comprehensive agreement to address some of the other important resource management issues in the basin. It's obvious that there is need for more certainty around water supply for agriculture and water availability in the river to support fisheries and other important aquatic resources. So we view the dam removal process as an important step, but not a sufficient step in order to address these larger issues.
How many dams are there here, and which ones specifically are being targeted for removal?
So there are four project dams that are currently contemplated for removal and that the KRRC anticipates taking possession of and then ultimately removing. Those four dams include the J.C. Boyle Dam in Oregon, Copco Number 1, Copco Number 2, and Iron Gate Dam on the California side. So those are the four dams that will be part of the Lower Klamath project. And if we receive the approval from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and other regulatory agencies, we will take possession of those and then remove those four dams.
Of those four that are being targeted for removal, there's multiple purposes for building a dam, be it flood control, to create reservoirs, for power generation. What are the purposes of these four dams?
Yeah, I want to be real clear on this because there's a lot of misperception about the role that these dams play. They were originally constructed as hydroelectric dams, and they continue to operate that way today. These four dams operate for the sole purpose of providing electricity and spinning turbines and providing electricity. They do not operate for flood control or for agricultural or municipal water diversions. The water that flows into these dams is essentially the water that flows out, so they operate specifically and exclusively to provide hydroelectric generation. And when they go away, there will be no interruption in power to customers. Pacific Corp, the current owner of the dams, has replacement power plans in place and ready to go at the appropriate time to replace the power that will be lost when the dams are decommissioned.
So it's not going to have any impact on agriculture use or potential of power outages or anything like that if these are removed?
Yeah, that's right. The operation of the Klamath River will continue to be managed at Link River Dam. The Bureau of Reclamation really makes the decisions under court order and other operational considerations as to the flows in the river. So nothing that we will be doing related to the removal of the four dams will affect the flows in the river. And again, the power production will be replaced by other generating facilities that are in Pacific Corp's portfolio. These four dams represent somewhere on the order of 2% of the generating capacity in their portfolio. So they have ample capacity to replace this power without any interruption whatsoever.
So how did the conversations for dam removal start, and why do this now?
Well, again, it goes back to those early conversations about how to address the over-allocation of water and resources in the river. And so we've seen some slippage in those original discussions, as I mentioned, when the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement failed to move forward, and the parties coming back together to amend the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. And so the time is right to do this project. We're seeing here today difficult circumstances with the irrigation interests and drought in the upper basin and continued over-allocation of water in the river. So the time is right really to move forward with dam removal to provide the benefits that we expect to see as a result of doing the project. Those benefits include restoring a more natural river condition and improving water quality. And we're very optimistic, as I said, that parties to conversations about addressing other broader issues are engaging in meaningful discussions to try to address water shortages and provide more certainty for folks so that we can eliminate some of the water wars and the ongoing battles that result from a working river that's overtaxed.
It becomes controversial anytime that you talk about water or changing water availability in any way. So what are the arguments for and against dam removal, and what are some of the misunderstandings that have come up in the course of the conversations about should we remove these dams?
Well, I think the reasons why the project makes sense is that we see these continued trajectory of declines in the fish runs. We have the ability to do something positive for those fish runs by opening up good cold water tributary habitat so that the fish have places for spawning and rearing. We have opportunity to see dramatic improvements in water quality by restoring a more natural condition We've got disease in the river that affects outmigrating salmon. And so by removing the dams and creating a more natural hydrologic condition, we have the ability to hopefully reduce that disease condition in the river and improve conditions for fish and other aquatic resources that are important to the river and to the communities that rely on it. It's an important first step in addressing the larger resource management issues in the basin, and I think that folks acknowledge that this project needs to move forward to allow other discussions to be fruitful as we work toward providing more certainty for irrigators on water supply and more certainty for downstream interests, that there will be ample flows in the river to support fish and other important resources. So I think those are really the main reasons why this is the right time for the project to proceed.
And what are some of the arguments against the project that you've had thrown your way?
Well, we certainly get the argument often as on the basis of a lot of misperceptions about the benefits of the dams, and I've mentioned a few of those. There is perception that the dams provide flood control benefits, or that there is irrigation or other diversions for water users, and that's just simply not the case. Again, these dams exist for the purpose of producing hydroelectric power. And so some of the opposition to the project really involves that. I think there is, opposition that we've got workable dams and they produce clean hydroelectric power. And why would we remove an existing facility? The fact of the matter is that these dams are approaching their lifespan. They were installed between the early 1900s and the mid 1900s. So like any infrastructure, they've got a fixed life cycle, and we're coming up on the end of that life cycle for these facilities. And so they're going to need significant work. From a regulatory perspective, the Pacific Corp, the current owner of the dams, was looking at the alternative of relicensing those, but in the interest of providing cost certainty and protections for their customers, they did an evaluation, and the Public Utility Commissions agree that this approach is in the best interest of the customers. And so for a variety of reasons, the decision has been made that we're going to go down this pathway of removing the dams. I just want to be clear that the KRRC does not influence the decision. Whether the dams should be removed or not, we simply implement that decision, and we're going to do that to the best of our abilities. But we really can't change this outcome.
Recently, you submitted a monster homework project last month. I've written some long-term papers before in college, but a 2,300-page decommission plan was submitted. We don't need to go over all 2,300 pages, but can you at least give us the cliff notes of what that plan encompassed?
Yeah, we sure did. They pulled a lot of all-nighters to get to this 2,300-page definite plan for the Lower Klamath project. This really is our proposal to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to detail out every aspect of how we would go about decommissioning the dams. So we've taken a very close look at all of the technical elements of drawing the reservoirs down, removing the dams, restoring the environment around the dams, and we've made our proposal to FERC on how we would go about doing those things. In addition to that, the definite plan looks at a number of other issues of importance, including how we will address risk and liabilities associated with the project, and also takes a close look at the cost estimates for the work, so that we have assurance that we have sufficient funding to do the project. We very much look forward to putting this definite plan in front of the independent board of consultants that we are convening at the direction of FERC. This is a group of subject matter experts in dams and dam removal and environmental restoration and insurance and risk management, who will be giving the definite plan a critical review and helping us to improve on the proposal for how we will actually implement the dam removal work.
So where does the dam removal process currently stand, and what kind of timelines are we looking at for total removal?
Well, we are right up in the middle of a whole bunch of complex and lengthy regulatory processes, including the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission evaluation of our application for the transfer of the license and the facilities from Pacific Corp to the KRRC. That process will be followed by FERC's analysis of our application for the surrender of the hydroelectric license and the ultimate approval of our decommissioning plan. Meanwhile, we also have regulatory processes going on at the state level. The states of Oregon and California are processing our applications under the Clean Water Act for Section 401 water quality certifications. We have a variety of other field studies and permitting underway. So a lot of regulatory steps remain to be taken before we're anywhere close to being ready to take these dams down. We'll be undertaking a variety of other measures, including some procurement for professional services and so on, to help us implement the project. Our current schedule, and if everything holds, we would expect that in 2020, we will be undertaking significant site preparation and some early construction activities, followed by the drawdown of the reservoirs in January and February of 2021, followed immediately thereafter by the actual removal of the dam, extending throughout the rest of 2021 and into 2022.
So what agencies are involved in this process beyond just KRRC?
Well, the primary federal agencies that are involved, of course, include the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, together with the National Marine Fisheries Service, will be taking a look at the biological assessment that we are preparing, and they will be preparing a biological opinion for the project. The Corps of Engineers is involved as they consider the Clean Water Act Section 404 dredge and fill permit that we will be working toward. So that constitutes the primary federal agencies that are involved. I mentioned the states are working on Section 401 clean water quality certifications. That's the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and the California State Water Resources Control Board, who are responsible for the 401s. Also, the Water Board in California is responsible for the CEQA environmental impact report. So they're working on that on a timeline to issue the draft EIR probably sometime in September of this year, followed with the final about a year from the release of the draft, so probably by September of 2019. So those are the primary state agencies involved, along with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and a variety of other state agencies looking at various permitting aspects of the project. And then, of course, we have some local jurisdictions that we'll be working with for the purposes of obtaining permits or fulfilling permit requirements as we move forward.
I'm no expert on demolition, but I imagine this whole process can't be cheap. So where is funding coming from, and what factors may come into play that could possibly make it to cost more than current projections?
Yeah, it is an expensive undertaking to work on what is, by all measures, the largest dam removal project currently being considered. Funding for this project comes from two sources. The first is money that is from the Pacific Corp customers in trust and managed by the California and Oregon Public Utility Commissions. That funding source amounts to $200 million. The second major source of the funding for us is up to $250 million from the California Proposition 1 water bond that voters in California passed in 2014, and the California legislature appropriated the last couple of years up to $250 million. So all combined, we have up to $450 million to implement the project. In the definite plan, we include an update of the cost estimate. Our best estimate of what we expect the dam removal and related work to cost is sitting right at $398 million. So comparing that to the $450 million funding level that we have, we believe confidently that we have sufficient funding to implement the full project at this time.
How is dam removal going to change the Klamath Basin? There's factors like environment and agriculture, economy, and also just during construction, there's going to be impact to residents that live in close proximity, right?
That's right. There will be a whole host of changes that are expected to result from the dam removal project. For us, a big part of this is simply to restore a more free-flowing river and create fish passage for species that have been on a bad trajectory over the last decades. This is also very much about restoring the connectivity of the river to the communities that depend on it, whether those are tribal interests or agricultural interests. We believe that the project has the opportunity to help reconnect those communities to this river in a positive way. Certainly, if we see the return of fisheries, the tribal communities who are so reliant historically on salmon, will have the opportunity to have that important cultural aspect restored. For agricultural communities, we believe that what is good for fish is good for agriculture. So we believe that perhaps less directly, if we are successful in restoring a more natural flow condition in the river and addressing some of the disease issue, the current requirements for flushing and dilution flows that exist under court order may or may not be reduced, but we're hopeful that we're on a trajectory to improve conditions that should result in more certainty and improve conditions. You mentioned the potential impacts for local residents, and you're absolutely right. During construction, we're going to have a lot of large equipment moving up and down the roads and around the dams. So we do anticipate that there will be some impacts to residents. We will work very closely with the construction contractor for the purposes of ensuring that we minimize those impacts and that citizens have opportunity to let us know if they have concerns or issues during the construction.
A project of this magnitude doesn't happen without precedents, and so I'm sure there's been other areas where dams have been removed. So for the areas where this thing has been done previously, what benefits have been seen? Are there possible negative impacts, and how have those areas been affected?
Yeah, there certainly are some good examples of previous dam removals, and the KRRC is taking full advantage of the lessons learned from those previous projects, including recent work on the White Salmon River, the Condit Dam in Washington State, as well as the Elwha dams up on the Olympic Peninsula. There are a number of benefits that have been seen from both of those projects. It is amazing how quickly they saw restoration of the fisheries. Literally within a matter of months in some cases, certain species are utilizing the habitat that was opened up as a result of the dam removal. In the case of Elwha, there are positive benefits for the marine environment. The delta that was formed as a result of the movement of the sediment out into Puget Sound has resulted in the restoration of a Dungeness crab fishery and a variety of other marine advantages and benefits, as well as the freshwater environment. There are certainly potential for negative impacts as well, and we are working very carefully to try to identify and mitigate for those impacts and to anticipate things that could go wrong and address those in advance. But yes, this is like any large project, there is the potential to create negative impacts. We will control the things we can by doing the best job we are able to do to anticipate what those might be and to have plans in place to address them as they come up.
There's a lot of money involved in this. There's a lot of emotion involved in this, and there's a lot of moving parts. So while there's timelines and plans going forward, things could potentially still derail, whether it's legislative, legal, water rights. There's some factors. So what is the potential that things could possibly get delayed or even canceled at this point?
Well, you're sure right about that. This is a very complex project with a lot of moving parts. It's amazing at any given time how many things we're working on. But, at the end of the day, we really have to focus on controlling the things that we can control. Certainly, there could be legislative action or litigation or other kinds of things that might come up. We can't control those things. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we really are responsible for implementing the decision that has been made to take these dams down. And so we're going to be focusing on the things that we can control. But yes, at the end of the day, there are potential for a lawsuit. We will anticipate that and be prepared to do what we can to address that. You specifically mentioned water rights, and I just want to be very clear on that nothing that this project is doing will have any effect on anyone's water right whatsoever. Again, the operation of the river will continue to be controlled at Link River Dam by the Bureau of Reclamation and others, and nothing that has anything to do with dam removal is going to affect anybody's water right. So that really is a non-issue.
Water isn't just used around here for environmental and irrigation. It's also a matter of recreation. A lot of people enjoy boating, canoeing, kayaking. Fishing is obviously big out here. How might this change recreation in the Klamath Basin as a result of changing water levels and some reservoirs turning into rivers?
Yeah, well, we're certainly going to have a big impact on the reservoir-based recreation that people enjoy today, and we're certainly cognizant of that. And we're working diligently toward replacing that lake-based, reservoir-based recreation with river-based recreation. We've undertaken a significant outreach effort to engage members of the public, the rafting community, the fishers, the RVers, and others to help us develop a plan for recreation facility replacement. So through that process, we've begun to get really good input from folks on what sorts of facilities they'd like to see and where they would like to see those facilities constructed. So we very much will be focused on the replacement of those recreation facilities. At the end of the day, again, we think that this project will have positive impacts on the fishery and create significant new opportunities for people who enjoy river fishing and river recreation to have abundant opportunity to do so.
When you're changing things this much, there's always a cause and effect or a domino effect that can occur with things downstream. Are communities going to have to modify things in terms of water access or water lines or pipelines or anything like that?
Well, yeah, there are a number of impacts to existing infrastructure and things that we are currently addressing. Let me give you two examples. The city of Wairika in Siskiyou County, California, has a water line that currently lays at the bottom of one of the reservoirs, and we are going to be responsible for relocating that water line in advance of drawing down the reservoir. So it's the KRRSEA's obligation to ensure that we maintain the city's water supply uninterrupted, and we need to complete that project in advance of drawing those reservoirs down so that that water line is not exposed to the new river conditions. So we will fulfill that obligation, and we are working very closely with the city and have established a very good working relationship with the City of Wairika staff and mayor and city council members for the purposes of doing that project. So we are fully committed to successful outcome there. The second example that I would give you is that there is likely to be some marginal increase in flood risk for structures in the 18-mile reach immediately downstream of the Iron Gate Dam that will result from the deposition of some of the sediment that will be mobilized and transported when we begin the drawdown of the reservoirs and ultimately the removal of the dam. So we've identified that there's likely to be somewhere between a 6-inch and an 18-inch increase in the flood elevation for the 100-year event. And we're talking about slight increase here, not a wall of water rushing down the river, but we've identified about 3 dozen structures in that stretch of the river that are going to need to be protected from that potential increase in the flood risk. So we'll be working with property owners for the purposes of providing protections for those structures and ensuring that they are protected from that flood event.
A long time ago, when a lot of these dams started getting built, the Army Corps of Engineers drastically modified the landscape, straightened some of the waterways and modified things from an agricultural perspective. Is this removal going to change the landscape in terms of how things look?
Well, you know, in the area of the dams and downriver to the mouth of the Pacific Ocean, the river is generally unaltered in the way that you're describing. So is the river going to be transformed in some way as a result of the dam removal? My answer is yes, it will be. And I think that the way in which it will be transformed is to restore natural processes of sediment transport and flows that will, allow the river to behave as it otherwise would in the absence of those impediments, the dams and other controls. So we think this will be a positive way to restore natural conditions to the river. Again, we don't influence anything in the agricultural area or anything that touches any agricultural or municipal water. We think that this is an opportunity to restore natural processes to the river, which will benefit the fisheries and other resources.
Mark Bransom is the CEO of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, or KRRC, who is working extensively on the ongoing dam removal project here in the Klamath Basin. Thank you so much for taking some time to educate us about this obviously very complex situation. We appreciate all the information.
Thanks, Kurt. Good to be with you today.